It's really a great pleasure to have you here, Suyutin. I heard so much of you. I've been just following you on the CGTN TV, but having you here at our mission ahead of the Chinese New Year, this is a great start of the Chinese New Year, I would say.
How do you evaluate the bilateral ties since the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the UAE?
China firmly recognized the fledgling UAE in 1971 and opened the door to strong UAE-China relations, furthered by a historic visit by the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan to China in 1990. This visit saw his vision, deepening contact in all fields, not simply confined to the economy alone. In more recent years, the advanced levels of cooperation flowered more as President Xi Jinping made his state visit to the United Arab Emirates in July 2018, where together with the UAE leadership, a comprehensive strategic partnership was established. This relationship was refined during the visit to the Belt and Road Forum by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai. The partnership was deepened still further by the state visit to the People's Republic of China by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the UAE Armed Forces. The profound friendship and cooperation between the peoples of China and the UAE shines ever more brightly today than ever. There are Chinese companies working in free zones across the UAE. The UAE hosts the largest Chinese diaspora in the Middle East, and its population is estimated between 200 to 300,000, which makes them amongst the largest UAE populations. Our country is now a significant hub for business and trade for China, and there are 6,000 Chinese companies well established and operating in our country. We see Chinese culture considered ever more deeply in the United Arab Emirates. Mandarin can be found written across UAE airports, the largest mall in the world, Dubai Mall, and display on the landmarks across the UAE in a key moments as the recent 2021 New Year's celebrations. There are also initiatives in place to advance a Chinese culture center in the UAE. This is a part of our bilateral agreement with China, who are in turn also opening a UAE culture center in Beijing. These centers indeed will be lively centers of culture, inspiring current and future generations to the depth and intricacy of Chinese and Arabic cultures. Such initiatives will elevate people-to-people understanding and bring a closer relationship across multiple levels between UAE and Chinese peoples. We have also laid the foundations for the future as the Chinese school Dubai becomes the first Chinese curriculum school offering K-12 education outside of China, already heavily subscribed. This reflects the depth and strength of the ties of the friendship and cooperation between the People's Republic of China and the UAE.
Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, what cooperative measures and efforts have been made by China and UAE in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic?
In the early stages of the pandemic, the UAE was one of the first donors to offer medical aid to China providing shipments of face masks and gloves. Compassion and solidarity between the UAE and Chinese leadership was offered by the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, who said the UAE was ready to provide all support to China and cooperate with the international community to tackle this virus. The UAE displayed the Chinese flag on UAE landmarks in expression of solidarity and support. China's Sinopharm and the UAE's G42 agreed in June 2020 to activate phase 3 clinical trials in the UAE, testing out on volunteers to ensure the vaccine is safe. The first phase 3 trials of an activated vaccine for COVID-19 in the United Arab Emirates were among the largest in the world, with the volunteer recruitment having reached more than 30,000 vaccinated volunteers from more than 120 nationalities in only 6 weeks. This led to approval of the vaccine, with the UAE's national health sitting an 86% efficacy rate. The Sinopharm vaccine has now been widely rolled out across the Emirates, which have contributed towards the 3 million or more than 3 million vaccine doses administered across the Emirates. The program has also contributed towards the doses per people achieving more than 31.5 per 100, the second highest rate in the globe. So I'm proud to see that UAE among top countries in terms of rolling out vaccination.
International and regional security is still a daunting challenge. How will China and UAE join hands to combat terrorism and maintain international and regional peace and stability?
The United Arab Emirates considers terrorism as a global scourge that transcends national borders, which has caused the spread of extremism and expression of security and humanitarian crisis in the region and the world, and the occurrence of many losses of lives, tremendous damage to the infrastructure and economies of countries. Example of that are many. The UAE stressed the importance of eliminating the scourge of terrorism by strengthening international efforts within the framework of the 4 pillars of the United Nations global counter-terrorism strategy. Both countries, the UAE and China, believe the international community should cooperate in combating terrorism in accordance with the United Nations Charter, international law and other universally recognized rules. The wise leadership of the two countries intends to enhance cooperation in the field of combating terrorism in order to establish stability internationally and regionally, especially because of what is happening in the world in general and in the Arab world in particular.